Hey there, it's Jordan. Delighted to be joined by Willie Burnley Jr. You're at-large city councilman in Somerville, Massachusetts, and I wanted to have you on. You guys just passed something that, in this climate, where frankly the Democratic Party is starting to shift more towards let's give more money towards police. Your city council just passed cutting $400,000 from the police budget in Somerville with resolution to redirect at least 200,000 from those cuts to unarmed emergency response personnel. I wanted to start because nationally, as you've seen, obviously we know Republicans where they stand, but Biden, his budget gave 32 billion more to police. Democrats running in Congress, Senate are pushing, tougher on crime. How did you pass this in Somerville, Massachusetts? I mean, Massachusetts is fairly liberal, but I mean, that's still a lot of money to cut in this climate from a police budget.
Yes, and Massachusetts is fairly liberal, but it is actually a stronghold for police in many ways. Most people who haven't studied the history of policing in this country don't realize that Boston, which we're 3 miles north of, was the first city in the country to have a full-time public police force. So the roots of policing in this country are deeply embedded in Massachusetts, and our politics unfortunately reflects that in many ways. Our state 2 years ago put up a vote to ban tear gas and a lot of more police reform minded things in our state legislature, and all of those votes failed miserably because of the more blue dog, for lack of a better term, Democrats in our state legislature. So there's just some context about the broader Massachusetts political scene on this issue. But Somerville is unabashedly progressive on many fronts, although policing is one of those issues that is still quite polarizing locally. A little context about how this vote got to where it is. Again, my name is Willie Burnley Jr., Somerville City Council. I'm a socialist, I'm an abolitionist, and I ran as such when I was elected last year. I've only been in office for about 5 months. But I made it very clear when I ran that I believe that we need to transform public safety in our community. And what that means is we need to holistically look at what makes people safe and realize that we can do so much more with the funding that we have when we put it towards housing, when we put it towards healthcare, when we put it towards mental health services and jobs and opportunities for our residents, rather than saying that we are going to invest in incarceration and state-sanctioned violence. And so last night, when we're in the midst of our budget season, we heard from the police department, and they were proposing the largest increase in their funding in the last decade. And as we've been talking about this in our community for the past 2 years, since the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, we as a community have been embarking on this journey to, quote, reimagine policing and, more importantly, in my mind, reimagine public safety. And there were several things that we had set for goals for us as a community in that process. We wanted to push for civilian oversight of the police. We wanted to study whether we would do better as a community by civilianizing many of the roles in the police department. And so right now there's a staffing study that is ongoing. And we wanted to make sure that we had policies in place to ensure that if, for example, and this is very relevant to the cuts that were made, police were going to wear body cams, which in Somerville, they really don't for the most part, or they aren't mandated to at least. That we actually have policies in place to make those effective, because body cameras, the results of them are mixed at best in terms of police accountability. Some studies show that they're actually used more often to prosecute other people than hold the police accountable. And the results of them in terms of tamping down police violence are also quite mixed, sometimes even negative, have a negative effect. And so in the discussion we had last night, part of that increase to the police budget was that they wanted $127,000 for body cameras. And they also wanted separately pay increases for all the police officers who use body cameras. And then they also wanted to hire someone to run the body cameras and to make all the footage the sole property of the police department. And so even from just a policy level, there was much concern amongst many of the counselors about what this would mean for civil liberties, what if this was putting the cart before the horse. Somerville is a community that is a leader when it comes to, we've banned facial recognition technology locally. And we are very concerned about our civil liberties as a community. And so this idea that the police are going to walk around with cameras that will record everybody that they see and record audio, and that they will just have this repository of information that they control, was quite concerning, even to the folks who wouldn't brand themselves anti-police or necessarily even pro-defund. Just from a policy standpoint, there was a lot to be concerned about there. And so we were able to make some motions to cut the money for the body cameras, cut the money for the positions that would initiate those that program, which subsequently would cut the need for all these cops who are only, for some reason, the upper echelon cops who are going to get pay raises to wear the body cameras. Because for some reason the cops said, oh, if you're new, you don't need that pay raise for wearing the body cameras. Only old cops need it. Even though the police in Somerville, like in many places, are the most well-paid public employees we have. They make hundreds of thousands of dollars at the top ranks. So some make over $300,000, which is about double what our mayor makes. So part of the way that we were able to do this was the fact that as we are going on this journey to reimagine what public safety looks like, we want our response to be community led. We want to be able to make sure we have policies in place that reflect the values of Somerville. And we are not willing to let the police negotiate themselves out of any accountability or oversight just because in Somerville, after 7 years, they decided body cams were okay when since 2015, at the least, they've been fighting against them locally. And of course, there was also major push from the community around this, which I can talk about more, but I don't want to do the thing.
I'm also curious about Somerville in terms of its economic picture. Just quick research. It's one of the wealthier areas in the region, and I think the conversation, particularly in corporate media, is always divorced when they're talking about crime. They don't like to focus on the drivers of crime. People aren't out, killing each other or, stealing or anything just because they're in the mood. There's a lot of economic desperation out there that drives crime. But in Somerville, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a wealthier area. How does Somerville's kind of demographics play into it being so progressive in terms of, being able to cut so much from the police department?
It's interesting, the economic picture, because the economic picture in Somerville has changed rapidly. 10 years ago in Massachusetts, if you talk to someone about Somerville, they use words like slummerville. Some people even use stabberville. There was this idea that Somerville was a less than type of community. Historically, Somerville is a working class community. It's the densest municipality in New England. It's one of the most dense municipalities in the country. Used to be one of the most dense places in the world. For a long time, this community has been a place where people came from all over, lived with their families in triple deckers stacked on top of each other, and really fought to make ends meet. And we still are living a similar lifestyle in that I live in a triple decker. I'm at the top. I got 4 roommates. I'm a renter. Most people in our city are renters, and most people are not actually doing quite well. And the price of living is skyrocketing here for reasons that are related to the wealth that has come in the last 10 years. In the last 10 years, people who make over $200,000 have gone up significantly in our community. And that's largely because of people who work in the biotech arena, tech in general. We are right above Cambridge. We're on the Cambridge line. So if folks know anything about Cambridge, it is a brain trust of industries with technology, and Google is there, and HubSpot, and so many different companies that are multi-billion-dollar companies. And after years of being next to Cambridge, and Cambridge kind of reaching their capacity around some of those things, some of those industries are now moving into Somerville, and some of their employees are now moving into Somerville, which has really spiked both the wealth of the community, some of the amenities of the community, but also the disparity between the cost of living and what folks actually have. If you talk to most people, like I do, knocking on doors, a lot of people are concerned about their ability to stay living in Somerville because of its costs, which I think is really pertinent for this conversation because, Somerville has a history of being related to crime. I mean, I live on Winter Hill, which some might famously know from the term the Winter Hill Gang, which relates back to Whitey Bulger. Somerville used to have a lot going on in terms of some of these things. However, crime has been on a decline in Somerville for decades. And as crime has been on a decline, we've seen other needs really spike up. Cost of housing is exponential here. You can't buy a place in Somerville unless you have $1 million. The cheapest house in Somerville is over $1 million. And most people I know don't have $1 million. And so most of the residents here are concerned about where they're going to live, where their kids are going to live, how they're going to pay for childcare, how the conditions of the schools. We have schools in Somerville that are literally falling down. And one of the biggest fights we're having right now in terms of the political conversation is how we are literally going to rebuild some of our elementary and our middle schools specifically, and elementary schools actually, because they, in recent years, have leaked. One of our schools, the floor fell out of several years ago. Luckily, no one was hurt, but a floor literally collapsed. There are real economic needs in our community that I think are understated when we consider Somerville a wealthier community. But that disparity has brought a lot of problems. And because of that, most people their biggest fear is not crime. Their biggest fear is, where am I going to live? How am I going to feed myself? What is the future that I have in the place that I love? Or am I going to have to get pushed out? And right. For me, as a newly elected counselor, it's very personal. The first year I moved to Somerville back in 2016, I fell in love with this place. It was the first place I ever had a lease as an adult. And within that same lease cycle, I got displaced because my rent skyrocketed hundreds of dollars. And as a newly graduated college student with no funds who went to a liberal arts school, I didn't have a lot of economic security to fall back on. So the folks who are here right now, they are extremely invested in our future as a community. And they know that the way that we build security for people, the way that we build safety, is by investing in education, housing, healthcare, and jobs, and not saying whenever there's a problem, we're going to put more money in police so that they can not solve it.
Mm-hmm. And what does that say to you, the approach you and the council has taken when you compare it to the national party, the Democratic Party, that, I mean, they had their chance, Build Back Better wouldn't have fixed everything, but would have had some real structural change, some structural reforms in there. In my opinion, Biden allowed, President Manchin to basically sabotage the whole thing. He I don't think he went on offense the way he should have against people obstructing it. And, crime has gone up as the temporary measures that the coronavirus relief bill delivered expired. Obviously, crime goes up when housing is going up, rent is going up, everything's going up. But the answer has been, let's put more money into community policing, which to me often just means policing, and more money thrown at the police rather than addressing the root causes.
Yeah, it's a sad state of affairs for the Democratic Party at the national level. It's not a surprising state of affairs, unfortunately. When I think about the contrast between what we're doing here at the local level and what the Democrats are doing at the national level, it's quite sad. You would think these people who actually have power, actually have the ability to get things done, would try to do so, but it, from my vantage point, seems wrapped up in fear of action, in defensiveness, and Biden is still trapped in the 90s with his triangulation of, hey, I love Republicans. Nancy Pelosi famously saying, oh, we need a strong Republican Party. It is either naivete or sabotage, subterfuge of any real progress that could be made, as far as I'm concerned. And for the folks who want to try something but are scared of the backlash, I would just say, be bold. We actually do have the power to make things change. I have a poster on my wall right here, and it says, "Another world is possible," and I truly believe that. And we've seen, going back to the Trump years, what it means when states and localities know that there's not support from the federal government, and take that responsibility on themselves to say, you know what, we're going to pass sanctuary city laws. You know what, we're going to, can start experimenting with UBI on the local level. We're going to figure out how we can, Austin famously took a bunch of money that they took out of the police budget and said, we're going to buy hotels so that we can end homelessness in our community. There are a lot of creative and powerful policy solutions that we can do on the local and state level. But it is frustrating, to say the least, that the National Democratic Party is playing softball and refuses to go on offense on these issues when there's so much at stake and when they have so much power. I mean, you mentioned the COVID measures that were taken. When we talk about the checks that were sent out and the child tax credits, we actually saw that childhood poverty was cut in half in this country. We cut poverty in half, and it undermines the entire Republican argument that they've been using for the last 50 years about, oh, Democrats are socialist. I am a socialist. And, oh, they just want to give away free stuff. Okay, well, what happens when you give away free stuff? People stop being in poverty. We see that they still want jobs, but maybe they actually just demand better treatment at their job, better wages, and better conditions. It is not a coincidence that in this time of unprecedented fear in the workplace with coronavirus, that we've seen a resurgence in labor. And we've seen people stand up and say, you know what, I'm not going to take poor treatment anymore when it could endanger my life. For a check that barely gets me to survive. I know that we can do better, and I'm going to fight for it. And what happened? We saw Amazon get unionized. We are seeing Starbucks getting unionized. Locally, we have a lot of coffee shops that are being unionized here in Somerville. And it all goes back to this idea of people demanding what they deserve and their leaders having their backs. And in Somerville, the biggest petition we've ever had locally was one that I was part of in 2020 to move at least 10% out of the police department and put it into housing, healthcare, jobs in our community. It was 4,000 residents signed on to that. did hours and hours of calls to their elected representatives, emails, a bike caravan and a protest. And what happened is we won. We moved over $1 million out of our local police department and put it into rental assistance, hiring more social workers and youth specialists, healthcare, food subsidies, all sorts of things. And now, even 2 years on, we had a public hearing to start off our budget season. I don't have the exact numbers, so I won't say exact numbers, but many people called in to our meeting to say that we should not be doing an unprecedented investment in policing when our health and human services are underfunded, when housing is the most critical issue for everyone agrees, the most critical issue that we are facing locally right now for our residents. And not a single person called in to say we should give the cops more money. Not a single person called in to say that we should even just keep the budget as it is for the cops. Everyone who spoke about it said that we should be taking money out of them and putting it into these other departments that deserve and need support so that they can provide a critical service. And as someone who is now newly elected, I think that the national folks should take a page out of what we're doing here locally and say, when the people tell you they want something, when something is overwhelmingly popular, like Medicare for All is, like these checks were, like so many other, like gun reform is, like so many issues are on the national stage, you have a duty and a responsibility to step up and do everything you possibly can to meet the needs of your constituents.
Absolutely. Thanks for taking the time, Willie Burnley Jr., a councilman at the Somerville City Council. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching, and make sure to tune in to Status Coup's daily live stream Monday through Thursday at 5 o'clock Eastern Time and Fridays at 4 o'clock Eastern Time.